Now that we understand why strategic foresight matters, let's dive deep into how it actually works in practice. I want to walk you through a practical framework that you can apply to any situation, whether you're mapping out your career trajectory, steering your business through uncertain waters, or working to make your community more resilient to future challenges. Trust me, you'll be using these tools before you know it. Strategic foresight isn't some mystical crystal ball gazing process or a skill reserved for corporate oracles. It's actually a structured, systematic methodology that anyone can learn and master. I discovered this framework in a game-changing book called Thinking About the Future, Guidelines for Strategic Foresight by Andy Hines and Peter Bishop, who were my professors at the University of Houston. This completely transformed how I approach future planning. They brilliantly organized the process into 6 sequential steps that build on each other, creating a robust foundation for understanding what lies ahead. And the best part? Once you get comfortable with these steps, you'll start seeing opportunities to apply them everywhere in your life. Let me show you exactly how this works. We'll break it down piece by piece, and I'll share some real-world examples from my own experience as a futurist. Think of it as your personal roadmap to becoming a more strategic thinker. Are you ready to peek into the future with me? 1. Framing. Scope, objectives, key questions, stakeholders, time, horizon. Every journey needs a map, right? Well, framing is where you draw the boundaries of that map. This initial step is all about defining what you're actually trying to figure out. It's like deciding which part of the unexplored territory you want to navigate before you even take your first step. Think about the last time you faced a big life decision, maybe choosing a college major or deciding whether to take a job across the country. You probably started by asking yourself specific questions. What am I trying to accomplish with this choice? What time frame am I considering? Just the next few years or the trajectory of my entire career? Who else will be affected by this decision? Will this impact my family, my partner, or my broader community? That's framing in action. You're setting the parameters for your exploration, creating guardrails that will keep your thinking focused and productive. Without this crucial step, it's like trying to navigate without knowing which direction you're heading or how far you need to travel. And let's be honest, we've all experienced that overwhelming feeling when a question seems too big to tackle. Proper framing transforms those intimidating questions into manageable pieces that you can actually work with. For organizations, this means clearly defining the scope of their foresight exercise. Are they looking at the future of their industry as a whole, or just a specific product line? Are they concerned with next year or the next decade? Who needs to be involved in the process? These questions aren't just bureaucratic formalities, they're the foundation that determines whether your foresight work will produce actionable insights or just vague predictions that gather dust on a digital shelf. A futurist worked with a healthcare system last year that initially wanted to explore the future of healthcare. Talk about broad. They narrowed it down to examining how changing demographics in their specific region would affect service demands over the next 7 years. That focused scope made the entire process more manageable and the insights more actionable. You should have seen the relief on their faces when their overwhelming question was transformed into something they could actually tackle with confidence. Their leadership team went from feeling paralyzed by possibilities to energized by specific opportunities they could prepare for. The time horizon is particularly crucial. Most strategic foresight projects look 5, 10, or even 20 years ahead, far enough to escape the tyranny of quarterly thinking, but not so far that everything becomes pure speculation. Think about it. If you're only looking 3 months ahead, you're basically just extending current trends. But push too far into the future, and you might as well be writing science fiction. The sweet spot varies depending on your industry's pace of change. For you watching at home, consider what time frame makes sense for the decisions you're facing right now. A 5-year horizon might be perfect for career planning, while family decisions might benefit from a longer view. Here's a question for you. What's your personal time horizon? Are you planning just for next month, or do you have a vision that extends years into the future? The longer your horizon, the more possibilities open up, but also the more uncertainties you'll need to navigate. Think about it in your own life. Are you someone who meticulously plans 5 years ahead with detailed milestones, or do you tend to focus on what's immediately in front of you? There's no right answer here, but understanding your natural planning tendency can be incredibly revealing. I've worked with clients who couldn't see past their next quarterly report and others who were mapping out decade-long transformation strategies. What about you watching right now? Maybe you're contemplating a career change that would take years to fully realize, or perhaps you're wondering how emerging technologies might reshape your industry by the time your children enter the workforce. Your personal time horizon affects everything from your savings habits to your educational investments to the risks you're willing to take. Once you've framed your exploration, it's time to look outward. Scanning is like turning on your radar to detect signals of change from every direction. This is where you become a detective, searching for clues about how the future might unfold. It's not just passive observation, it's an active process of sifting through the noise to find meaningful patterns that others miss. Remember that feeling when you first noticed everyone around you starting to use a new app or talk about a new trend? That moment of realization, this thing is catching on, is exactly what we're looking for in the scanning phase. You've experienced this before, right? Maybe you spotted the rise of a social platform months before your friends, or you noticed a shift in fashion before it hit mainstream stores. But here's the real skill: detecting weak signals before they become obvious to everyone else. Weak signals are those early indicators of potential change that most people miss. They're like faint whispers that precede a shout. They might appear in niche publications, specialized forums, or experimental projects in university labs. The trick is training your attention to notice these subtle cues that most people filter out as background noise. Want to know a secret? The best futurists I know are voracious readers across wildly different fields. They're constantly connecting dots between seemingly unrelated domains. That weird article about advances in material science? It might contain implications for the future of your industry that nobody else has spotted yet. The same goes for that obscure policy change in a different country, or that emerging cultural movement that's just beginning to take shape on the fringes. I've found that maintaining a diverse information diet is crucial. I follow experts outside my comfort zone, subscribe to newsletters from adjacent industries, and regularly browse academic journals that seem only tangentially relevant to my work. You'd be surprised how often breakthrough insights come from these unexpected sources. To ensure you're scanning comprehensively, use what we call the STEEP framework. That's social, technological, economic, environmental, and political factors. By systematically examining each of these dimensions, you're less likely to miss important signals of change. I like to create a digital board where I collect articles, studies, and observations under each category, looking for patterns and connections that emerge over time. Last month, a retail client who had been focused exclusively on technological trends. When they expanded their scanning to include social factors, they discovered shifting family structures that completely changed how they thought about their target demographic. That insight alone was worth the entire Foresight exercise for them. They realized their entire marketing strategy was based on an outdated understanding of household decision-making processes. What about you? Which areas of the STEEP framework do you naturally pay attention to, and which might you be overlooking in your own scanning process? Now we're getting to the part that people often misunderstand. Forecasting isn't about predicting a single future with certainty. It's about exploring multiple plausible futures systematically. It's like mapping out different paths through an uncharted forest rather than claiming to know exactly which trail will lead to the perfect destination. Once you've gathered signals through scanning, you need to make sense of them. Which trends are short-lived fads, like those viral social media challenges that disappear within weeks, and which are massive megatrends that will reshape entire systems for decades to come? What happens when these trends interact with each other, creating ripple effects and unexpected consequences that weren't visible when examining each trend in isolation? This is where we develop scenarios, essentially different stories about how the future might unfold. Instead of betting everything on one prediction, we typically create 4 distinct narratives that capture a range of possibilities. Think of these as alternative movie scripts for the future, each with its own plot twists and character arcs. There are several ways to build these scenarios. The deductive approach starts with two key uncertainties. Imagine axes on a graph, creating 4 quadrants, each representing a different future. For instance, a city might look at high versus low population growth on one axis and rapid versus slow technology adoption on the other. The resulting 4 worlds would each present dramatically different challenges and opportunities for urban planning, resource allocation, and community development. Then there's the inductive approach, which is often more powerful. Rather than starting with a predetermined structure, you look for potential interactions among trends and signals, applying systems thinking to build more organic, emergent scenarios. This method allows patterns to surface naturally from your research rather than forcing them into preset quadrants. You might notice how automation trends intersect with changing work values or how climate adaptation connects with new community structures. These intersections often reveal surprising futures that a more rigid approach might miss. Let me share an example. A university was planning a new campus. Instead of just extrapolating current enrollment trends, they developed 4 scenarios, one where online learning dominates, another where lifelong learning becomes the norm, a third where international education explodes, and a fourth where economic pressures drive hyper-specialization. In the online dominant scenario, they imagined a world where physical spaces serve primarily as collaboration hubs, while most content delivery happened virtually. Picture tech-enabled meeting rooms with interactive walls, movable furniture, and holographic displays. Spaces designed not for traditional lectures, but for the kind of deep collaboration that still benefits from face-to-face interaction. The lifelong learning scenario required flexible facilities that could accommodate students ranging from 18 to 80, with spaces designed for cross-generational interaction. Think adaptable classrooms, where a retired engineer could work alongside a fresh high school graduate, with accessibility features seamlessly integrated rather than added as afterthoughts. The international education scenario demanded multilingual signage, culturally adaptive spaces, and infrastructure for global connectivity. Imagine common areas designed to accommodate different cultural norms about personal space, prayer rooms serving multiple faiths, and dining facilities offering diverse cuisine options, plus robust technology allowing real-time translation and simultaneous participation from satellite campuses worldwide. And the hyper-specialization future called for modular spaces that could be quickly reconfigured as market demands shifted, labs that could transform from biotech to quantum computing facilities within weeks rather than years, and learning environments that could adapt to entirely new disciplines that didn't even exist when the buildings were designed. Each scenario required completely different campus designs. The architectural team was initially overwhelmed, but this process ultimately saved them millions. Can you imagine the cost of retrofitting traditional buildings for these radically different futures? By planning for this range of possibilities from the start, they created a flexible campus that could adapt as the future became clearer. And guess what? Elements from 3 of the 4 scenarios ended up materializing within just 5 years of completion. That's the power of scenario thinking, not predicting the exact future, but preparing you for whichever version arrives at your doorstep. Some of you watching might have even attended a university that benefited from this kind of forward thinking without realizing it. Think about your own life. How might different scenarios affect your career, your investments, or where you choose to live? The point isn't to predict exactly which scenario will happen, but to be prepared for a range of possibilities. What would happen if your industry underwent massive automation? Or if remote work became the permanent standard across your field? Perhaps climate migration shifts population centers dramatically, or new technologies create entirely new career paths that don't even exist today. These aren't just abstract possibilities, they're potential futures that could directly impact where your next job opportunity appears, how your retirement savings perform, or whether your current city becomes more desirable or less livable. I've worked with clients who initially dismissed scenario planning as too complicated to use, only to find themselves caught completely off guard when their industry transformed overnight during the pandemic. Meanwhile, those who had considered multiple futures had already developed the flexibility and contingency plans to pivot quickly. You don't need elaborate models for this. Even spending an afternoon contemplating how you'd respond to 3 different future scenarios can reveal blind spots in your planning and highlight opportunities you might otherwise miss. The exercise isn't about perfectly predicting tomorrow, it's about expanding your peripheral vision so you can spot the signposts of change before everyone else does. While scenarios explore what might happen, visioning focuses on what you want to happen. This is where you define your preferred future, your North Star. The difference is subtle but crucial, my friends. When we engage in scenario planning, we're mapping possibilities. With visioning, we're crafting intentions. Visioning requires challenging your assumptions about what's possible. It asks, what would outrageous success look like for you or your organization in 3 to 5 years? If everything went right, what would you achieve? This isn't just daydreaming, it's strategic imagination at work. You need to push beyond the boundaries of what you currently believe is attainable. Most of us operate with invisible constraints we don't even recognize. That's not realistic, we tell ourselves, often before we've truly examined why. I've seen this countless times in my workshops. People dismiss brilliant possibilities because they've internalized limitations that may not actually exist. When you engage in proper visioning, you temporarily suspend your practical concerns. You create a detailed mental picture of your ideal future state, how your work feels, what your daily life looks like, the impact you're having. The more vivid and emotionally compelling this vision, the more powerful it becomes as a decision-making tool. I facilitated a visioning session with a community organization where we first explored their assumptions about their limitations. Once we identified and questioned those assumptions, their vision expanded dramatically. They went from planning incremental improvements to reimagining their entire approach to community service. Let me take you behind the scenes of that transformation. When I first walked into their meeting room, I could feel the weight of "we can't" hanging in the air. These were dedicated people who had been serving their community for decades, but they'd become trapped in cycles of incremental thinking. "We don't have the budget," they'd say, or "the board would never approve something that ambitious." We spent a full morning just unpacking these perceived constraints, writing each one on a colorful sticky note and plastering them across the wall. Then we examined each assumption critically. Was it truly immovable? Had they tested it recently? What evidence supported it? You should have seen the looks on their faces as they realized how many of their impossible barriers were actually just unchallenged habits of thought. By afternoon, the energy in the room had completely shifted. The same people who had been hesitant to consider expanding their food pantry's hours were now sketching plans for a comprehensive wellness center with integrated services. They moved from thinking about helping more people in the same ways to fundamentally rethinking what community support could look like in the 2040s. I'd like you to try something right now. Close your eyes for just a moment and imagine your ideal life 30 years from now. Don't constrain yourself with what seems realistic. Really envision what success would look like if everything aligned perfectly. Let your mind wander freely through the possibilities. What kind of home are you living in? Is it nestled in a bustling city center with vertical gardens cascading down the sides of buildings? Or perhaps it's a sustainable countryside dwelling powered entirely by renewable energy. Who surrounds you? What meaningful work fills your days? How has technology transformed your daily routine? This is actually a powerful tool futurists use to break through the limitations we unconsciously place on our thinking. When we remove those self-imposed barriers, even for just a few minutes, we often discover aspirations and possibilities that have been hiding just beneath the surface of our conventional thinking. Go ahead, take another moment if you need it. The future you're creating in your mind right now might contain the seeds of innovations we haven't even considered yet. I pause briefly. That exercise you just did? That's the seed of visioning. The key is to make that vision specific and compelling enough that it can guide your decisions today. It's about crafting a future so vivid and detailed that you can almost reach out and touch it. When your vision has texture, when you can feel the morning sunlight streaming through those energy-efficient windows, hear the sounds of your community's gathering spaces, and sense the purpose in your daily work, it becomes a powerful compass for navigating present choices. I have seen this with countless organizations and individuals I've worked with. Those who take the time to develop richly detailed visions tend to make decisions with greater clarity and confidence. They're not just reacting to the present, they're actively building towards something extraordinary. Their vision becomes a filter through which they evaluate opportunities, challenges, and trade-offs. Think about what you just imagined. What elements of that future excite you most? Which aspects feel most meaningful? These are clues to what truly matters to you, and they can become anchors for the decisions you're making right now, today, in your life and work. 1. Planning with your scenarios and vision in place. Planning as phase translates foresight into action. It's where all that imaginative thinking becomes concrete steps you can actually implement in your daily life and work. I've seen too many brilliant futures conceived that never materialize because no one mapped the path from here to there. One powerful technique we use is called incasting. Imagine temporarily living in each of your future scenarios and asking, what would we need to do to succeed in this specific future? By thinking through the strategic implications of each scenario, you can identify actions that make sense across multiple futures. Try it yourself. Step into that future you just envisioned and work backwards. What decisions would you need to make today to begin that journey? The goal isn't to bet everything on one scenario coming true, but to develop what we call robust strategies, approaches that will work reasonably well no matter which future unfolds. These are your insurance policies against uncertainty. A coastal city that was planning infrastructure investments. Rather than just preparing for the most likely sea level rise projection, they identified strategies that would serve them well across multiple climate scenarios. Some investments made sense in every future, while others were contingent on specific developments. This approach gave them both a core strategy and a set of trigger points for when to activate contingency plans. They weren't paralyzed by uncertainty, they embraced it and planned accordingly. This approach works in your personal life too. Think about skills that will be valuable across multiple possible futures or investments that provide returns under different economic scenarios. What capabilities will serve you well whether we face climate disruption, technological revolution, or social transformation? The most robust strategies aren't always the most optimized for any single future. They're the ones that keep you in the game no matter what happens. They provide flexibility when the unexpected occurs, as it inevitably will. Remember, the future doesn't just happen to us, we help create it through the choices we make today. Your planning process is your first step in actively shaping the tomorrow you want to see. 1. Acting. The final phase is all about implementation and adaptation. Strategic foresight isn't a one-and-done exercise. It's an ongoing process of sensing and responding to change. Think of it as establishing a continuous feedback loop between your plans and the emerging reality around you. This means creating systems to continuously monitor developments, track how closely reality matches your scenarios, and adjust your strategies accordingly. It's about building what we call an early warning system that alerts you when significant shifts are occurring. You'll want to identify specific triggers or thresholds that, when crossed, signal it's time to pivot or double down on particular strategies. One manufacturing embedded this monitoring directly into their quarterly executive meetings. They established key indicators for each scenario and regularly assessed which future was becoming more likely. This allowed them to shift resources proactively rather than reactively. In one instance, they spotted early signs of supply chain disruption 6 months before their competitors and secured alternative suppliers, giving them a significant market advantage during a crisis. The most successful organizations don't treat foresight as a special project. They institutionalize it, making future thinking part of their cultural DNA. They recognize that adaptation isn't something you do once and then stop. It's a continuous process of learning and adjusting. These organizations create dedicated roles, regular rhythms of review, and incentives that reward forward-thinking behavior at all levels. You can apply the same principle in your personal life or small business. Set aside time every few months to evaluate how the world is changing around you. Are your assumptions still valid? Which of your scenarios seems to be unfolding? What adjustments might you need to make? By building this reflective practice into your routine,
You'll develop the adaptive capacity that distinguishes those who merely survive change from those who thrive through it. The same applies to you, my fellow future thinkers. How can you build regular horizon scanning into your daily or weekly routines? Maybe it's setting aside 30 minutes every Sunday evening to read about emerging trends, or perhaps creating a digital folder where you save articles that challenge your assumptions about what's coming next. What specific indicators would tell you that certain futures are becoming more or less likely in your industry, community, or personal life? Is it housing prices in your area, adoption rates of new technologies in your field, or shifting patterns in how your children talk about their career aspirations? By developing these concrete habits of foresight, not just as abstract concepts but as regular practices, you'll be better positioned to navigate whatever comes your way.
The people who thrive through change aren't necessarily the ones with perfect predictions. They're the ones who noticed the subtle shifts early and adjusted their course accordingly. You can be one of those people, and I'm here to help you develop that superpower together. Wrap up. This 6-step process, framing, scanning, forecasting, visioning, planning, and acting, provides a structured approach to exploring and preparing for the future. It transforms abstract uncertainties into concrete strategies, turning those swirling question marks into actionable pathways you can actually walk down. Think of it as your personal navigation system through the fog of what's to come, a way to make sense of complexity without oversimplifying it. Remember, the goal isn't perfect prediction. It's about expanding your perception of what's possible, identifying both risks and opportunities before others do, and developing the agility to thrive in a range of conditions. You're not trying to be a crystal ball gazer here. You're becoming someone who can dance with uncertainty, who can spot the early signals while everyone else is still focused on the noise. This is about building your adaptability muscles so that when the winds of change blow, and trust me, they always do, you're not just bracing against them, you're adjusting your sails to harness their power. I've seen countless futurists, both beginners and veterans, transform their effectiveness by mastering these 6 steps. Some of my colleagues who struggled with overwhelming amounts of information found that the framing step alone dramatically improved their focus. Others discovered that methodical scanning revealed patterns they'd been missing for years. What part of this process do you think might be your personal game changer? In our next segment, we'll dive deep into how organizations have applied this framework to tackle real-world challenges. But before we go there, I'd love to hear from you. Which of these 6 steps do you find most challenging? Is it the disciplined scanning that requires consistency, or maybe the storytelling aspect of scenario development that pushes you outside your comfort zone? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's create a community of practice where we learn from each other's experiences and struggles. Strategic foresight isn't just for corporations with massive research budgets or governments planning national security. It's a powerful tool for anyone who wants to actively shape their future rather than simply react to whatever comes their way. Whether you're planning your career in an industry facing automation, helping your children prepare for an education system in flux, or simply trying to make smarter long-term decisions in your personal life, these skills transfer beautifully across contexts. And in today's rapidly changing world where yesterday's certainties become tomorrow's obsolete assumptions at breakneck speed, that's a capability we all need to cultivate. You deserve to be more than just a passenger in your own future. You can be the navigator. Until next time, keep scanning those horizons.